This is an Apostrophe podcast production.
This is We Regret to Inform You, the Rejection podcast. I was starving to death and I lived in a single apartment with a brand new baby in a basket on the floor. You get desperate. Jim Carrey. Every time Jim Carrey went to the movies as a kid, he noticed something strange would happen to him. He'd leave the theater a different person. He'd go in Jim Carrey and come out Clint Eastwood in a fistful of dollars. When he got home, he'd make his way to the bathroom vanity and stand in front of the mirror. But he wasn't looking for popcorn in his teeth. He was looking for the Phantom from Phantom of the Paradise, or Henry Fonda in On Golden Pond, manipulating his face, trying to make the character he'd involuntarily inhabited over the last 2 hours appear in front of him. It wasn't perfect at first. His mother warned him if he obsessed over his reflection too long, he might see the devil. But he'd furrow his brow, squint his eyes, tilt his head, and downturn the corners of his mouth in such a way he not only looked like Clint Eastwood, he became him. Jim Carrey says from the time he hit Earth on January 17, 1962, he was weird. His parents later told him that to get out of eating dinner as a toddler, he would go into a convulsive shake in his high chair until they could no longer convincingly stifle their laughs. His mother was a stay-at-home parent and visual artist from Toronto. His father was a Quebecois saxophonist and clarinetist, moonlighting as an accountant. Carrey was the youngest of 4 kids, and together the family of 6 lived in Newmarket, Ontario. Many of Carrey's sweetest childhood memories involve 3 things: the couch, the television, and his father. Saturday nights were dedicated to the Carol Burnett Show. Sunday nights, they'd watch Rodney Dangerfield knock 'em dead on the Ed Sullivan Show. And his father would practically howl at the stand-up comics' one-liners. Carrey had no idea what any of the jokes meant, but he'd laugh along because his dad was laughing. When his father went to bed, Carrey would wander to the vanity and do his best Rodney Dangerfield or Tim Conway in the mirror. Carrey's dad was a masterful jokester. Carrey describes his father as the most joyful person you'd ever meet. He said he wrapped anyone who came over to their house in stories and jokes, and sent them home with pee stains, after several declarations that Percy Carey had missed his calling. Carrey's father got a real kick out of his weird son, watching him practice bits in the mirror and developing the same appreciation for the ridiculous. He started rolling him out whenever they had company over as the evening's entertainment. Carrey would do anything for a laugh, including throwing himself down the stairs or mime choking on a piece of meat in front of his parents' dinner party guests. His father couldn't get enough. Carrey says his dad really was his biggest champion. Lying at the bottom of the stairs, his dad never made him feel stupid. He told him he was brilliant. Soon, Carrey brought his impressions to school, where he quickly became known as the class cut-up. It was incredible. By sheer force of comedy, suddenly he was noticed, special. and by grade 4, he'd amassed a repertoire of 120 different impressions. So, naturally, it came time to do what any 10-year-old would do: get his career rolling. Carrey found an envelope and addressed it to The Carol Burnett Show at Studio 33, Television City in Los Angeles. Inside, he put together a resume featuring an itemized list of every impression he had mastered, plus a clear mission statement to become a series regular. He dropped the letter in the mail, and off it went, from Southern Ontario to Southern California. A short while later, a letter arrived in the mail addressed to one Jim Carrey, and Carrey says as he tore the envelope, everything went in slow motion. Inside was a letter from someone Carrey later surmised was an assistant on The Carol Burnett Show at that time. The letter thanked Carrey for his submission, but said the sketch comedy show typically scouted its talent via agencies. The letter then wished the 10-year-old the very best of luck and encouraged him to keep up with his impressions, and at the bottom was Carol Burnett's signature, stamped on. It was a tactfully worded rejection letter, but Carrey barely noticed. It was a rejection letter from Hollywood. Someone in Television City knew his name. Despite being the class cut-up, Carrey also loved spending time alone, sketching and writing poetry. Carrey said his bedroom was heaven to him. And his bedroom self was kind of a serious guy. He said he never rented comedies, only really heavy dramas. In grade 6, Carrey entered a speech contest. He chose to write what he knew about the history of comedy. In his speech, Carrey covered all comedic genres, including a section on ventriloquism, where he pulled out a dummy and performed part of his speech without so much as an upper lip quiver. At the end of the contest, finalists lined up on stage as they announced the winner, Jim Carrey. Carrey was flabbergasted, but not as flabbergasted as his father sitting front row. When he heard his son's name announced, his dad screamed so loud, his dentures flew out of his mouth. Carrey said those flying teeth became his first on-stage victory. When Carrey was 11, his family moved 1 hour south from Newmarket to Burlington, Ontario, where his dad got a new job as a controller at a local company, and Carrey was enrolled at a new school. Carrey tested at gifted levels, so schoolwork came easy to him. He could finish a test before anyone else in the class, but he remembers one teacher labeling him as disruptive. You see, finishing fast meant he had to wait for everyone else to finish, and that was prime time to test out his bits. Grade 6 was tricky, but grade 7, Carrey said his grade 7 teacher was clued in. Noticing his inability to sit still, she made him a deal. If 12-year-old Carrey behaved himself throughout the entire school day and finished all of his work, he could have 15 minutes before the final bell rang to entertain his fellow students. It was a dream, so Carrey collected spare moments throughout the day to methodically plan his bits, dinosaur impressions, and crazy teacher imitations. It was his first official stand-up set, a time slot dedicated to being funny. But come 8th grade, life for the Carrey family took a very serious turn. When Carrey was 14, his father was laid off from his company, and Carrey says his father was too old to be hired for another white-collar job. The family moved to a small house in Scarborough, Ontario, next to a factory. And at that factory, the whole family, including the kids, was forced to take jobs to keep the family afloat. What crushed Carrey was that accounting was his father's consolation career. When his true dream of playing sax or clarinet professionally didn't pan out, he boxed his instruments and settled for a steady, safe job that paid the bills. To have that not even work out was torture. Carrey watched both his parents slip into a depression, and he watched himself become completely consumed by anger. He didn't understand why the world would punish his dad, this good, deserving human he worshipped. And Carrey started searching for outlets for that anger. If anyone so much as looked at him funny, he'd square up. After a full day at his new school, Carrey would pull an 8-hour shift at the factory, sweeping hallways and cleaning toilets. It was exhausting. He started missing classes, and the formerly straight-A gifted student began flunking his courses. And by grade 10, Jim Carrey dropped out of high school. Carrey started working full-time at the factory, and he said it was a truly horrendous time in his life. He watched his father shrink, and Carrey and his brother started drinking. They'd punch holes in the walls of the factory, then come up with elaborate excuses for the damage, usually involving a rogue industrial sweeping machine. Carrey's parents hated the people they and their children were becoming. So one day, Carrey's father walked into the factory and quit on behalf of the whole family. They had nowhere to go, no income to pay rent, so they pooled their pennies and bought a VW camper van. The entire family filed inside, and Carrey says they essentially went camping for 6 months. They pitched tents at local campgrounds or willing friends' or families' lawns. And even though they had no kitchen, no walls, no money, they were so much happier than they'd been in months. And Carrey saw his father laugh again. One day, after a good howl at Carrey's latest characters, his father said to him, "You know there are these things called comedy clubs where you can get up and showcase these bits you do all the time?" Carrey's ears perked up, so he wrote a 15-minute set, a Frankenstein assembly of his favorite impressions from the Carol Burnett show. His mother dressed him in a bright yellow polyester suit. It was the 70s, and she'd seen it on Donahue. And Carrey made his way to Yuck Yuck's Comedy Club, the hippest comedy club in Toronto, which, at the time, was located in the hippest area of Toronto, Yorkville. The 15-year-old took a deep breath and stepped on stage. But when he started his set, let's just say it didn't go as well as it had gone at home in the bathroom mirror. There was a particular tradition at Yuck Yuck's at that time that when someone stumbled, they'd play the theme to Jesus Christ Superstar, Trial Before Pilate. And one line in particular, "Crucify him, crucify him, crucify him." Then, when no recovery could possibly be made, the co-founder of Yuck Yuck's, Mark Breslin, would take a second mic backstage and chant, "Totally boring, totally boring, totally boring." Alrighty then. The 15-year-old bombed. He wouldn't step onto another stage for 2 years. Around this time, Carrey's mother was struggling with chronic pain, and when her dependency on pain medication crossed over into an addiction, her mental and physical health took a turn for the worse. So when she was bedridden in pain, Carrey pulled on the only tool at his 16-year-old disposal. He jumped up on the foot of the bed and pretended to be a praying mantis. He contorted his body and his face until she laughed hysterically. And that's when Carrey realized comedy wasn't just about getting a laugh. It was healing. If he could stand on stage in front of a crowd, he could provide 100 people freedom from their concerns, like a ministry. With that shift in mindset, Carrey returned to the comedy club, but not to perform, to observe. He went to shows and watched other comics. He watched the crowd, studying the art of the set and which jokes landed with which audience members. He prepared fresh material, and by age 17, he was ready to try again. Carrey went back to Yuck Yucks and performed a set, and this time, he killed it. The crowd was roaring, but it wasn't just his jokes. Carrey was a visual performer. He had impossibly disjointed limbs and a face Rolling Stone writer Fred Schruers later described as frighteningly mobile. He was unlike any other comedian on the Yuck Yucks program, and Mark Breslin knew it. That day, Carrey became a regular player. Soon after that, he became a featured performer. Over the following year, Carrey would become known as the funniest guy in Toronto. He started earning a modest living as a comedian, helping to support his family through his art. Then he landed a manager, and that manager essentially said to him, "You can be the funniest guy in Toronto, or you can try your hand at the big leagues, Los Angeles." So Carrey saved up his money and booked a one-way ticket to Television City. Then his agent called. The funniest guy in Toronto got a spot on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. It's said Johnny Carson had the power to anoint comedic dukes and earls at will. A 10-minute set on Carson's stage could launch a lifelong career. So, ahead of Carrey's American comedy debut, his agents thought it best to set up a showcase, a performance to present fledgling talent to industry folk. A venue was chosen, famous LA comedy club The Improv, and a date was set, 2 days before The Tonight Show. There was buzz around Carrey's performance. Through word of mouth, the funniest guy in Toronto soon became the funniest guy in Canada, and everyone wanted in on his debut. But as Carrey took the stage, he said his set fell a little flat. Carrey had never performed for industry types before. It was a different crowd, less eager to laugh. They weren't looking to ease their concerns with a night of jokes at the comedy club. Their concern was the jokes at the comedy club. When Carrey finished his set, people came up to him to pat him on the back. They were kind, overly kind, too kind. He said as he walked out that night, he couldn't help but feel it all slipping away. The next morning, Carrey got a phone call. His Tonight Show performance was canceled. It was decided he wasn't ready. Carrey wandered to LA's famous comedy club, The Comedy Store, feeling completely out of place. He said he looked like someone left a choir boy at Sunset and Vine. He knew the owner of the Comedy Store, Mitzi Shore, would be there that night, so he performed his heart out. But once again, he said it was an off night. The microphone literally fell apart in his hand. When he finished his set, Carrey didn't stop to introduce himself to Mitzi, who was standing at the back of the room. Instead, he blew right past her, out the door, and straight back to his motel. He gathered his things, and for the second time that week, booked a one-way ticket back to Toronto. And we'll be right back. Back home in Toronto, Carrey had nowhere to go. So he went back to Yuck Yucks, where everyone knew he had gone to LA to make it big. Each time he went on stage, the MCs would tease him. Our next act just got back from the Comedy Store in Los Angeles, where he had great seats. He started wondering if stand-up was really the be-all, end-all. Maybe he didn't have to squeeze himself into a box. Maybe he could be an actor, too. Carrey went back to killing it regularly at Yuck Yucks, and that's when he was approached by David Holliff. Holliff was a manager for Canadian comedian Howie Mandel, and he took an interest in Carrey. Holliff told Carrey he had the talent to perform in LA. So in 1980, Carrey was swayed to try his hand at Los Angeles again. Holliff lined up some performances for Carrey at the Comedy Store and the Improv, the very places he'd bombed the first time around. But this time, he killed them both. This trip to LA couldn't have been more different from the first. Soon he became a featured performer at the Comedy Store. Carrey said if there were ever one door to open, that was the one to walk through. He was getting standing ovations after his sets. He got to meet Robin Williams. Then he met his idol, Rodney Dangerfield, the very comedian who'd first awakened Carrey's funny bone back in Newmarket, Ontario. The very comedian he watched with his father for hours. Dangerfield, like Carrey's father, got a kick out of his weirdness, and he invited Carrey to open for him. Soon, Carrey was opening for Rodney Dangerfield and Buddy Hackett. And at age 18, he decided to audition for the mother of all comedy gigs, Saturday Night Live. The 1980-1981 SNL season was an interesting one. It was the first season the cast would change since the show's inception 5 years prior, and the first year without its fearless leader, Lorne Michaels. Michaels would return by 1985, but for now, someone else was overseeing auditions. Carrey chose two of his impressions to perform. One, Henry Fonda in On Golden Pond, and two, a post-apocalyptic Elvis. That's right. Carrey stood center stage, tucked his elbows into his t-shirt, wiggled his hands like flippers, and started singing Blue Suede Shoes, hip thrusts and karate chops included. Judd Apatow, who was also on the LA comedy circuit in the early 80s, said the latter was polarizing. Sometimes it drove the crowd wild, other times it frightened them. Jim Carrey was rejected from Saturday Night Live. 19-year-old stand-up Eddie Murphy was cast instead. Carrey spent much of the early 80s doing impressions and low-budget films. Then, at age 21, Carrey got a call from his agent. He was booked on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, a second chance at the biggest chance he'd ever been given. On November 24th, 1983, Carrey appeared on Carson's fabled stage. He performed a less frightening iteration of Armageddon Elvis. Then he told the crowd he probably spent his entire life staring in the mirror, but that he wasn't staring at himself. He was staring at Charles Bronson, James Dean, E.T., Bruce Dern, Michael Landon, Clint Eastwood, Jack Nicholson, and Kermit the Frog, a rapid-fire whirlwind of impressions. The audience almost didn't know what to do with him, but they couldn't stop watching. And pretty soon, they couldn't stop laughing. He rounded out 10 full minutes with a round of applause and a thumbs up from one Johnny Carson. Carrey took a bow. Over the following years, Carrey continued to open for Rodney Dangerfield. He said Dangerfield stuck with him when other comedians might have jumped ship. After he'd spend 15 minutes crawling around the stage as a cockroach escaping from a vacuum cleaner, Dangerfield would say he was keeping it fresh. That gig took Carrey to Vegas, where he became known for his impressions. But when Carrey gazed forward 10 years down the line, he didn't like where his life was headed. He feared the apex of his career would hinge on Vegas, opening for lounge acts or magicians, a place where the art of mimicry could skew into gimmicky. So Carrey made a bold decision to scrap his impressions. He said it was a terrifying call. His set, which by this point was foolproof, got the laughs and got the money, enough money to pay his bills. Plus, everyone in his life was pleading with him not to look a gift horse in the mouth. He was earning a living in comedy. Some people try their whole lives to achieve what he'd achieved. And he was going to just throw it all away? But Carrey scrapped that program. He left Las Vegas and walked away from it all. Carrey started auditioning for acting roles in LA, and in 1984, he was cast as the lead role of Skip Tarkenton in The Duck Factory. In a line, the comedic adventures of the employees of a hard-luck animation company. The brand new NBC sitcom had a recipe for success. With equal amounts money and buzz behind it, The Duck Factory was slotted right between Cheers and Hill Street Blues, Thursday nights, prime time. This was it. He'd made it. His gamble paid off. They started filming the first season, and Carrey called his parents. He told them he got a big show on NBC and invited them to come live with him. He was making Hollywood sitcom money now. He would be the hero son and support his hardworking parents. But as they filmed each episode, Carrey noticed none of his lines were particularly funny. He realized the person that hired him didn't even know he was a comedian. It appeared they just wanted a nice guy. His parents settled into his guest room. Then Carrey got word from NBC. The Duck Factory was closing indefinitely. It was canceled after 13 episodes. Carrey continued supporting his family until he couldn't anymore. He was forced to sit his parents down and tell them his valiant plan to provide for them had failed. Carrey says it was a horrifyingly painful moment in his life. His parents moved back to Canada. Carrey went bankrupt. Carrey was depressed. He got himself a roommate who recalls that time in their lives as one punctuated by chili and white bread. In 1985, Carrey auditioned for the role of Ferris Bueller, alongside John Cusack, Tom Cruise, Rob Lowe, Michael J. Fox, and Matthew Broderick. But, of course, he didn't get the part. So that year, he decided to take another shot at auditioning for Saturday Night Live. Dana Carvey was also in Burbank that day, doing his second audition for the show. Carvey said you pour your heart out in front of the SNL decision-makers and a few leftover cast members from the season before. Dennis Miller, John Lovitz, Nora Dunn, and you get no laughs. They've seen it all. But when Carrey took the stage, it was like nothing Carvey had ever seen. Carrey was balancing straight in the air on his pinky finger. It was wild. After their auditions, the hopeful comedians were seated in a waiting room. And Phil Hartman turned to Jim Carrey and said, "Well, you'll get it, or at least a featured player." Phil Hartman, Dana Carvey, and Kevin Nealon were cast. Jim Carrey was passed over a second time. Lorne Michaels said he never attended a Jim Carrey audition. The first time, he'd just left. The second time, he'd just returned and was learning to delegate. All he knows is someone else watched Carrey balance on his pinky finger that day and said Lorne wouldn't like it. Carrey walked away from stand-up for another 2 years. In 1987, Carrey says he got the bug again. He was done lying around. He was done waiting for other people to let him through the gilded gates of comedy. He would make things happen for himself. He started going to comedy clubs and improvising every night. And Judd Apatow says he came back with a vengeance. He stopped doing impressions and started doing characters. Apatow says he was a rambling madman with a microphone, crying on stage one minute and crawling into a baby grand piano the next. He said he would kill for a few moments, then bomb for a while, then kill again. But he was getting heckled aggressively. People didn't understand why this masterful impressionist wasn't doing impressions. He wasn't giving the people what they wanted, and the people let him know. But Carrey said people had no time for Bob Dylan when he went electric. This was Jim Carrey, plugged, and it was sink or swim. For 6 months, Carrey challenged himself not to repeat a single joke. He figured the experiment would only make him stronger. But he said every night he would go up unarmed and bleed in front of the crowd. He went to bed mulling over his set with a fine-toothed comb. What did his audience need from him? He became a comedy detective. Then one night after a show, he shot up in bed. He remembered being a little kid, desperate to make his mother laugh. And he remembered, like his mother, all these people come to his shows to feel free of their concerns. And the best way to provide that for them was to be free of concern himself. So he started his next show with a new line. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How are you doing tonight? Alrighty then. When he didn't wait for the audience's answer before moving on, he appeared to be free of concern for them. And they, in turn, became free of concern themselves. In 1987, Carrey married his girlfriend, actress Melissa Womer, at a hotel in Santa Monica. And that same year, Francis Ford Coppola saw Carrey in a show. And he liked what he saw. So Coppola cast him in his latest feature film, Peggy Sue Got Married, alongside Kathleen Turner and Nicolas Cage. Carrey would go on to be rejected for the role of Edward Scissorhands, though he made appearances in a few more films. The Deadpool in 1988, which starred Clint Eastwood. Here he was working with one of his tried-and-true impressions for years. He also did Pink Cadillac in 1989. But Carrey says by that point, he and his wife were practically starving to death. They were now living in a bachelor apartment with a brand new baby basket on the floor. Carrey was doing 3 comedy shows a night up the Sunset Strip. He'd walk out of a comedy club, go to the top of Mulholland Drive, sit on the side of the road, look down at all the lights, and dream up his life. He wanted to be a great artist. He wanted his work to last, and he wanted to be a millionaire. So Carrey pulled out his checkbook. He wrote a check to himself for acting services rendered, dated 5 years away, Thanksgiving 1995. The amount? $10 million. Carrey said everything he'd ever wanted in life, he manifested. He became the funniest guy in Toronto, opened for Rodney Dangerfield. He performed on The Tonight Show, so he thought, why stop now? He tucked the check in his wallet, but as each year passed, he watched it deteriorate. One night after a set, Carrey was approached by comedian Damon Wayans. They'd sort of clocked each other over the years through the LA stand-up circuit. Damon asked Carrey if he'd audition for something. He said, "Come meet my brother." Damon's brother, Keenan Wayans, had seen one of Carrey's SNL auditions and noted Carrey was an outlandish guy. Together, the brothers were working on a new sketch comedy show for fledgling network Fox. The show would be sort of the anti-SNL, with a mostly black cast. They were on the hunt for standout talent, auditioning 150 comedians for the part. Carrey didn't have any characters prepared, so he started improvising with the brothers. He said he completely let loose. At first, he was a Scotsman, then he was a pirate, then he was Nipsey Russell, and the brothers were falling down laughing. So they invited Carrey back for a second audition, this time a stand-up set at the Comedy Store. Also auditioning that night was Adam Sandler, David Spade, and Rob Schneider. The Wayans said Carrey's set was so wildly alternative, these crazy characters that were almost more performance art than stand-up. But it worked. He was hired, and the Wayans' new sketch comedy show, In Living Color, premiered in April of 1990 on Fox. 22 million people tuned in to the In Living Color premiere. The New York Times called it one of the freshest shows of the year. And after its first season, the series won an Emmy Award for Best Variety Series. It would be nominated again the next year, and the year after that. Fox reportedly wanted a sketch show that would push TV limits and stand out against the other networks. And boy, did they deliver. Soon, Carrey achieved water cooler notoriety. Written about in the Times, Variety, the LA Times, and the Chicago Tribune. Meanwhile, across town, the good folks over at Morgan Creek Productions were looking to produce a film with, quote, wide comedic appeal. Something manically lowbrow to compete against the highbrow comedies major studios were popping out like Tic Tacs. The company was pitched a script that piqued their interest. What if a pet detective is tasked with solving the mystery of the missing Miami Dolphins mascot, a bottlenose dolphin named Snowflake? They needed a lead actor who could do weird. They reportedly tested Judd Nelson, Alan Rickman, and Whoopi Goldberg. Rick Moranis and David Alan Grier turned them down. Then someone suggested the crazy guy from In Living Color, Jim Carrey. Carrey said he knew this movie was either going to be something that people really went for, or was going to ruin him completely. He said his character had to be unstoppably ridiculous, the 007 of pet detectives. He helped the writers do rewrites on the script, and in 1994, Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, was released. That same year, Carrey starred in The Mask and Dumb and Dumber, 3 films that raked in worldwide critical acclaim, a Golden Globe nomination for Carrey, and an astounding $700 million at the box office. People couldn't stop watching, and they couldn't stop laughing either. Carrey became the most talked about comedic actor in television and film. But just as Carrey reached the comedy apex, his father, his biggest cheerleader, passed away. At his father's funeral, Carrey reached into his wallet and slid out the $10 million check he'd written for himself 5 years earlier, when he was surviving off chili and a white bread career, and he gently laid it into his father's casket. That year, Jim Carrey, the comedian who once lived in a VW camper van, who was called weird and totally boring, rejected by Saturday Night Live more than once, passed over for parts, crucified on stage, and left wondering how he was going to feed his family, became a $10 million per picture movie star.
Back in 1978, I was lucky enough to be in the audience at Yuck Yucks. That night, a young kid was the featured performer. He looked like he was about 17, but his act was amazing. Not only did he do impeccable impersonations, his face could contort to become the face of the impression he was doing. That kid was Jim Carrey. You knew instantly he was destined for big things. But hearing his story, it's unnerving to realize how difficult that journey was for someone as talented as Carrey. 3 decisive moments jump out to me. The first is that Carrey chose to trust his weirdness. It happened that night he got up on stage and decided not to do impressions. Impressions came easy to him. They were a crowd pleaser. He was almost in a league by himself when it came to impressions because he nailed the voices and the faces. But instead, he chose to embrace his weirdness. He got booed, but he was willing to get booed in order to stay true to himself. That weirdness would eventually be his ticket to stardom. The second thing that strikes me is a theme we see so often in our series: the importance of having champions. Carrey's father championed his son's weirdness. Rodney Dangerfield let Carrey be Carrey. And the Wayans brothers not only encouraged Jim's eccentricity, they showcased it. The third key to Jim Carrey's success was the fact he visualized his goals. He envisioned himself becoming the funniest guy in Toronto. He imagined working with Rodney Dangerfield. He pictured himself walking onto the Tonight Show stage. And when he was at his lowest point, he wrote a $10 million check to himself dated 5 years into the future, all of which came true. When you visualize a goal, it becomes a pulsating destination in your career GPS. The route may have detours and speed bumps, but that tracking system will always drag you back on course. Jim Carrey once said, "It's better to risk starving to death than surrender." What he meant was this: if you surrender your dreams, you surrender your future. And if you surrender your future, how happy will you be? Visualize your goals, find your champions, stay weird, and never, ever give up.
James Eugene Carrey. Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. The Mask. Dumb and Dumber. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. How the Grinch Stole Christmas. The Cable Guy. Liar Liar. Bruce Almighty. Fun with Dick and Jane. Me, Myself and Irene. The Truman Show. Yes Man. Well, alrighty then.
The Rejection podcast is an Apostrophe Podcast production and is recorded in our Airstream mobile recording studio. This series is hosted and written by me, Sydney O'Reilly. Research, Allison Pinches. Our director is Callie O'Reilly. Engineer, Jeff Devine. We regret to inform you, our producer is Debbie O'Reilly. Our theme music is by Ian Lefevre and Ari Posner. All music is provided by APM Music. Major sources for this and all episodes are listed in the show notes on our website, apostrophepodcasts.ca/rejection. If you enjoyed this episode, you might also like Rejecting Nick Offerman from Season 2. Offerman was also rejected for his weird brand of comedy. He was ready to give it all up until he got a phone call in the sporting goods parking lot. Follow our network on social at @ApostrophePod. This series is executive produced by Terry O'Reilly. See you next time.